The intercom crackled to life with a sharp, robotic voice. Final boarding call for Flight 227 to Chicago. Travelers hurried down the jet bridge, shuffling bags and tickets, eager to settle into their seats. But for one passenger, this routine flight was about to take a shocking turn, because the moment Captain Robert Hayes saw her, his face twisted into a scowl. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "I need to speak with you." Michelle Carter paused mid-step, her boarding pass still in hand. She was used to the stares, the subtle glances, the unspoken assumptions, but this was different. The pilot's glare wasn't just dismissive, it was hostile. Around them, passengers slowed, sensing tension. A flight attendant, Lisa, hesitated nearby, her polite smile faltering. "Is there a problem?" Michelle kept her tone even, though her grip tightened on her bag. She knew this dance. The questioning, the suspicion, the way authority figures, especially men like Hayes, assumed she didn't belong. Hayes stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "First class is for paying passengers." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Michelle's chest burned, but she didn't flinch. She'd faced worse. What Hayes didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Michelle wasn't just another traveler. And by the time this flight was over, he'd regret every word. Behind her, a teenager, Jake, pulled out his phone, sensing drama. The Thompsons, an elderly couple, exchanged worried glances. The cabin hummed with uneasy silence. Then Hayes crossed the line. "I'm not flying this plane with you on board." Michelle's lips curled into a cold smile. "Oh," she said softly, "you're definitely not flying this plane." And that's when she reached for her badge. A hush fell over the first-class cabin as Captain Hayes' words hung in the air. Michelle felt every pair of eyes burning into her, the curious teenager Jake filming discreetly, the elderly Thompsons clutching each other's hands, the other passengers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The flight attendant Lisa stood frozen, her professional smile cracking under the tension. Michelle took a slow breath, the leather seat creaking as she leaned forward. "Captain," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel, "I have a valid ticket for this seat. Are you refusing me service?" Her fingers tapped lightly against the armrest, the only outward sign of her simmering anger. Hayes crossed his arms, his pilot's stripes seeming to gleam under the cabin lights. "I have full authority over who flies on my aircraft," he declared, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. A businessman in 2B shook his head but stayed silent. "And I'm not comfortable with this situation." Lisa finally found her voice. "Sir, her boarding pass checks out." Hayes cut her off with a sharp gesture. Michelle watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about her. This was about power, about who got to decide who belonged. Jake's phone camera light flickered on, casting a faint glow across his awestruck face. The Thompsons murmured to each other, their expressions shifting from discomfort to dawning outrage. Michelle stood smoothly, her designer coat falling into perfect folds. At her full height, she nearly matched Hayes' height. "You're right about one thing, Captain," Michelle said, her words measured. "You do have authority over this flight." A beat. "But so do I." Her hand moved toward her inner jacket pocket. Hayes tensed, his eyes darting to the movement. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Even the ever-present hum of the plane's systems faded into the background. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Jake leaned so far forward he nearly tumbled into the aisle. Then a voice crackled over the cabin speakers. "This is your first officer speaking. We are awaiting final clearance for pushback." The mundane announcement shattered the tension like a gunshot. Hayes recovered first. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to deplane," he said, reaching for the radio at his belt. "Officer Daniels will escort you." His fingers hovered over the call button, his meaning clear: comply or face security. Michelle's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Call them," she said softly. "Please." Something in her tone made Hayes hesitate. The passengers exchanged glances. The game was about to change, and none of them, least of all Captain Hayes, saw what was coming. Outside the window, a baggage handler's cart beeped as it reversed, its warning tone the only sound in the suddenly silent cabin. The battle lines were drawn, and Michelle Carter was just getting started. The fluorescent lights of the cabin flickered as Officer Daniels lumbered down the aisle, his polished shoes squeaking against the carpet. His eyes darted between Michelle and Captain Hayes, sensing the electricity in the air but missing its source. "Problem here, Captain?" he asked, thumbs hooked in his belt, the very picture of misplaced confidence. Hayes didn't take his eyes off Michelle. "This passenger needs to be escorted off my aircraft." The way he said "my aircraft" made Jake's phone hand tremble, the lens zooming in tighter. Mrs. Thompson gasped, her pearl necklace clutched in wrinkled fingers. Michelle remained statue still. "On what grounds, officer?" Her voice cut through the cabin like winter air. Daniels hesitated, looking to Hayes for guidance that wouldn't come. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant whine of jet engines on the tarmac. Hayes' neck flushed crimson above his starched collar. "I don't have to explain myself to." "Federal Aviation Regulation Part 121.533, Michelle interrupted, the numbers rolling off her tongue like a judge pronouncing sentence. Aircraft commanders may refuse transport only for safety or operational reasons. She tilted her head. Which of those am I, Captain? A collective inhale swept through first class. Jake's camera caught the exact moment Hayes' jaw muscles started twitching. Lisa, the flight attendant, backed against the drink cart, its bottles clinking like wind chimes in a storm. Daniels cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you'll just come with me. Michelle's laugh was soft, dangerous. Oh, I'm not going anywhere. She reached into her blazer, Hayes tracking the movement like a hawk. The entire cabin leaned forward as one. Even the engines outside seemed to quiet in anticipation. What happened next unfolded in slow motion. The glint of polished metal as Michelle's badge caught the light. The sharp intake of breath from Mrs. Thompson. The way Hayes' pilot wings seemed to droop on his chest as the blood drained from his face. Michelle Carter, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent cabin. Federal Aviation Administration, Inspector General's office. The badge might as well have been a live grenade for how it froze everyone in place. Hayes took an involuntary step back, his polished heel catching on the carpet seam. For the first time in his 20-year career, the man who commanded 100-ton jets looked like he might lose his balance. Lisa made a small, strangled noise into her hands. The revelation rippled through the cabin like shockwaves. Jake's whispered, "Holy shit," was picked up crystal clear by his phone mic. Mr. Thompson actually stood, his knees popping audibly. Outside, a fuel truck beeped its retreat, the sound oddly final. Michelle let the moment stretch, let Hayes sweat under the weight of his own mistake. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder now, the scent of leather seats and stale coffee suddenly overwhelming. Somewhere in economy, a baby started crying, the sound muffled but insistent. "You were saying, Captain?" Michelle asked sweetly, tapping her badge against her palm. The sound was like a gavel falling. Hayes opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His authority, his bluster, his entire career crumbling right there in front of 30 stunned witnesses. And Michelle, she hadn't even gotten to the good part yet. The badge gleamed under the cabin lights, its embossed seal casting tiny shadows across Michelle's palm. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved, no one even breathed. Then chaos erupted. Jake's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the tray table. Mrs. Thompson clutched her chest like she might faint. Officer Daniels took an instinctive step back, his boots scuffing the carpet. And Captain Hayes, his face went slack, his lips parting in silent disbelief. Michelle let the moment sink in. She had seen this look before, the dawning horror of a man realizing too late that he had gravely miscalculated. "Surprised?" she asked, her voice cool. "You should be, because as of this moment you are grounded." Hayes found his voice first. "Now wait just a damn minute." "No," Michelle cut him off with a single raised finger. "You don't get to speak anymore, not to me, not to anyone on this flight." She turned to Officer Daniels, whose face had gone ashen. "Call airport security. Tell them FAA Inspector Carter is invoking emergency regulatory authority." Daniels fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Static crackled as he stammered into the receiver. Across the aisle, Jake had recovered his phone and was now filming with both hands, his eyes wide. Hayes finally snapped out of his stupor. "You can't do this," he hissed, stepping forward like he might grab her. Michelle didn't flinch. "Try me," she said softly. The cabin door burst open. 2 FAA security officers, Agent Reynolds and a broad-shouldered colleague, marched down the aisle, their badges flashing. The other passengers shrank back in their seats. Even the baby in economy had gone quiet. "Captain Hayes," Reynolds said, his voice like gravel, "you're relieved of command." Hayes' mouth worked soundlessly. His hands, usually so steady at the controls of a 747, trembled at his sides. "This is a mistake," he choked out. Michelle smiled. "No, the mistake was thinking you could decide who belongs in your sky." She nodded to Reynolds. "Get him off my plane." The agents moved in, each taking one of Hayes' arms. For a second, he resisted, his pride battling the inevitable, but then his shoulders slumped, defeated. As they escorted him up the aisle, passengers recoiled like he carried some contagious disease. A few snapped pictures. One man actually clapped. Lisa, the flight attendant, stood frozen by the drink cart, her knuckles white around a champagne bottle. Michelle turned to her. "You have a new captain to brief." Lisa swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." The intercom crackled. A new voice, calm, professional, filled the cabin. "This is Captain Maria Lopez. We'll be underway shortly. Thank you for your patience." A murmur of relief swept through first class. Jake lowered his phone, grinning. The Thompsons exchanged glances, their shock giving way to something like admiration. Michelle took her seat, smoothing her coat. Around her, whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that? Who was she? That pilot got what he deserved." Outside, the sun glinted off the wing, blindingly bright. Somewhere below, Hayes was being marched across the tarmac, his career in ruins. And Flight 227 hadn't even left the gate yet. The cabin door sealed with a hydraulic hiss. the sound punctuating Hayes' disgraceful exit. A nervous energy buzzed through first class as passengers whispered behind cupped hands. Jake kept his phone raised, now filming Lisa as she hurried toward the cockpit, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down Hayes' career. Michelle settled back into her seat, the leather creaking under her weight. Across the aisle, Mr. Thompson leaned over, his voice trembling with emotion. "Ma'am, I just want to say, that was the damnedest thing I've ever seen." His wife nodded vigorously, pearls bouncing against her cardigan. Lisa emerged from the cockpit, her professional mask back in place but her eyes shining with something fiercer. "Captain Lopez will be out shortly to greet everyone personally," she announced. The passengers exchanged glances. This kind of attention from a pilot was unheard of. And the gasps started, first from 3A, then rippling through the cabin like a wave. Michelle followed their stares to the terminal windows. There, in full view of the entire aircraft, Hayes stood handcuffed in the jetway, his head bowed as Agent Reynolds recited his rights. The once arrogant captain looked small under the fluorescent lights, his uniform stripes suddenly meaningless. Jake whooped, earning a glare from Lisa. "Sorry," he muttered, still filming, "but this is going viral." The cockpit door swung open. Captain Lopez, a woman with sharp cheekbones and salt and pepper hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, surveyed the cabin before zeroing in on Michelle. "Inspector Carter," she said, extending a hand. "I've heard stories, but seeing you work in person." She shook her head in admiration. Michelle accepted the handshake. "Just doing my job, Captain." Lopez's mouth quirked. "Well, my crew and I would be honored to fly you today." She turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Pushback in 5. As Lopez disappeared back into the cockpit, Lisa approached Michelle with a glass of champagne. "On behalf of the airline," she said quietly. The apology in her eyes needed no words. Michelle accepted the drink but didn't sip it. The bubbles fizzed uselessly as she watched through the window. Reynolds was now escorting Hayes past a growing crowd of gaping airport staff. A baggage handler pointed. A gate agent covered her mouth. Then the satisfying click of seatbelts fastening all around her. The whine of engines powering up. The subtle shift as the plane disconnected from the jetway. Jake leaned across the aisle, his phone still recording. So what happens to him now? Michelle watched the terminal shrink as they taxied away. Federal investigation, possible revocation of his ATP certificate. She finally took a sip of champagne. And thanks to your video, a very public reckoning. The engines roared to life, drowning out the collective murmur of approval from first class. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Michelle allowed herself one small, satisfied smile. Somewhere below them, Robert Hayes was learning the hardest lesson of his life. The sky didn't belong to him after all. Wheels lifted off the tarmac with a smooth surge, pressing passengers back into their seats. But no one was thinking about takeoff physics. Every mind in first class buzzed with what had just happened. Jake's fingers flew across his phone screen, uploading footage with hashtags that would soon trend worldwide. Mrs. Thompson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, whispering to her husband about how she hadn't seen such justice served since the civil rights marches. Lisa moved through the cabin with renewed purpose, her service flawless but her gaze continually darting to Michelle. When she brought Michelle's meal, filet mignon, not the standard first-class offering, she lingered just a second too long. "I should have spoken up sooner," she murmured, voice thick with regret. Michelle set down her fork. "You spoke up when it mattered." The simple forgiveness made Lisa's shoulders relax for the first time since boarding. Over the Atlantic, the plane's Wi-Fi worked overtime. Jake's video, racist pilot messes with wrong black woman gone legal, had already amassed 50,000 views. The comments section exploded with cheering emojis and demands for Hayes firing. CNN's breaking news alert flashed on several passengers' phones. FAA launches investigation into airline discrimination incident. Captain Lopez's voice came over the speakers, warmer now. "We'll be landing in Chicago ahead of schedule. Current weather is clear skies." The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. A smattering of applause broke out. Michelle watched the clouds streak past her window. This wasn't her first time grounding a prejudiced pilot, but it was the first time the whole world watched. Her phone buzzed, a text from her supervisor. "Good work. White House wants briefing." She silenced it without responding. In the galley, the flight crew huddled around an iPad, gasping as Hayes' employment termination notice appeared on the airline's official Twitter feed. One attendant snorted. "Bet he didn't see that coming when he woke up today." As the plane began its descent, Jake worked up the courage to approach Michelle. "Ms. Carter, I just wanted to say thank you." His voice cracked with teenage earnestness. "For not taking his crap." Michelle studied him, this Gen Z kid who'd captured history with an iPhone. "No," she corrected gently. "Thank you for making sure people saw it." Landing gear deployed with a mechanical whir. Chicago's skyline glittered in the distance, its skyscrapers standing tall and unapologetic. Michelle smoothed her badge, still visible on her lapel. This was never how she planned to spend her business trip, But some detours, she reflected as the wheels touched down, made the entire journey worthwhile. The seatbelt sign dinged off. No one moved. 30 pairs of eyes waited for Michelle to rise first. When she did, the entire cabin followed, not out of obligation but respect. Lisa handed her a handwritten note with trembling fingers. "You gave us all wings today." Michelle tucked it into her pocket next to the badge that had started it all. Some fights chose you, not the other way around. And this one was just getting started. The terminal buzzed with its usual chaos, boarding calls, rolling suitcases, the occasional crying child. But as Michelle strode through O'Hare's gleaming corridors, something felt different. Passengers did double takes. Airport staff straightened their postures. A TSA agent actually saluted. Word traveled fast in the age of viral videos, and by now everyone knew exactly who she was. Michelle didn't slow down. She had a meeting with the FAA's regional director in 30 minutes, and a mountain of paperwork waiting. But as she passed a newsstand, her own face stared back from every major newspaper. FAA Inspector Ground's racist pilot in midair justice, blared the Chicago Tribune. On CNN, a legal analyst debated whether Hayes might face federal hate crime charges. At her gate, a young black girl, no older than 10, tugged at her mother's sleeve. "That's her," she whispered, eyes wide with awe. The mother's lips trembled as she mouthed, "Thank you." Michelle gave them a small nod, the weight of the moment settling in her chest. This was why she did it, not for the headlines, not for the vindication, but for every little girl who needed to see that the system could work. Her phone buzzed again. Jake's video had hit 2 million views. The airline's stock price was plummeting. And Hayes, his pilot's license was already suspended pending investigation. Michelle allowed herself one deep breath. This was justice, but it wasn't closure. There would always be another Hayes, another airline, another passenger treated like they didn't belong. The intercom announced final boarding for her connection to D.C. as she handed over her ticket. The gate agent, a black man in his 50s, leaned in. "My niece sent me that video," he said quietly. 20 years I've worked these gates. Today's the first time I felt proud of this uniform." Michelle took her seat by the window, the familiar hum of aircraft preparing for flight vibrating through her bones. Somewhere below, Hayes was probably sitting in a lawyer's office, still blaming everyone but himself. Let him. The skis were safer without him. As the new captain welcomed passengers, Michelle's fingers brushed the badge in her pocket. Today had been a victory, but the fight wasn't over. There were still inspections to conduct, policies to change, and she smiled as Jake's latest tweet popped up on her feed, a whole generation watching. The engines roared to life. Somewhere in economy, a baby laughed. And as the plane lifted into the sunset, Michelle Carter, FAA inspector, viral sensation, and unwitting symbol of justice, allowed herself to close her eyes, just for a moment. Tomorrow would come soon enough.